Good evening. My name is Karen Couch. I'm the superintendent for Kent County Public Schools, and tonight is our third listening session for the Kent County Middle School project. We are happy that we've been able to present at two other venues. We have one last venue on October the 27th at Kent County Middle School. That will be our fourth and final listening session. Tonight, I have with me Dr. David Lever. He is our consultant on this project. He is the principal of Educational Facilities Planning, LLC. As a consultant, Dr. Lever has advised local boards of education, local and state governments, private entities on a range of K through 12 educational facility matters, including strategic plans, project management, educational specifications, funding, and financing. One of the things that is particularly impressive with Dr. Lever is that he spent 13 years leading the IAC, which is the Interagency Committee on School Construction. He spent 13 years as the executive director who is responsible for management of state funding for capital school projects throughout Maryland. His organization collaborated with 3 other state agencies to assist local school districts in programming, planning, design, and construction of state-funded projects. Dr. Lever has a bachelor's degree from Cornell University, a master's of architecture from Harvard, and a doctorate in architecture from Rice University. He's had over 35 years of experience in private sector construction, architectural practice, and community planning. He consults with a number of school systems on the Eastern Shore throughout Maryland, and currently he is teaching classes at Virginia Tech in architectural design. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lever.
Thank you very much, Dr. Couch. And as Dr. Couch said, welcome to our third community listening session here in Rock Hall. The purpose of these sessions is to inform the community about the status of a Kent County Middle School project, and in particular to focus on 3 planning options that have been recommended by the Educational Specifications Committee. And we do want to note right from the beginning that no decision has been made on the grade configuration, on the scope, or the location of the middle school. We also want to hear your concerns and your questions and your observations. And this is very important because this will help to inform the final recommendations that the Educational Specifications Committee will make to the superintendent. The superintendent in turn will make a recommendation to the Board of Education, and then final decisions will be taken by the Board of Education and the Board of County Commissioners. The planning process to date has been lengthy. We started this in September of 2021. There are 16 members of the Educational Specifications Committee. They are teachers from the school system, they are administrators, they are members of the community, including parents, and we had a representative from the state. The committee has met 9 times. They've gone over background information. They've had discussion about objectives. They've done a tabletop exercise in the design of certain parts of the school. They also visited 3 middle schools in nearby counties. They visited 2 replacement schools, one in Dorchester County, one in Queen Anne's County, and they visited a major renovation project also in Queen Anne's County. Out of this came the review and prioritization of 12 planning options. Of those, through a process of prioritization and decision, they came to 3 planning options that were presented to the Board of Education for consideration. At the same time, we've had input from a number of different sources. In February and March of 2022, we had stakeholder meetings. We met with school administrators, we met with members of the community, met with county government and Board of Education members in a joint meeting. We had more than 40 participants in these stakeholder meetings. We also had meetings with individual grade bands, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade with the teachers, and we had more than 32 participants to hear what they would like to get from a middle school project. We're now in the stage of having the community listening sessions. As Dr. Couch said, the last session will be on October 27th at Kent County Middle School. And following that will be decisions by the governing bodies in late 2022, early 2023. Board of Education and county commissioners will make decisions hopefully at the end of this year, beginning of the next year. And based on their decision, whatever it is, among the three options or even a new option that might be presented by members of the community, then the decision will go to the Interagency Commission on School Construction with an application for funding to begin the design process, and that will take place in the winter of 2023 or the spring of 2023. And the rationale for this is that work has to be done on Kent County Middle School. It has to be either renovated or replaced. And what's really driving this in the first place is simply that there's a deteriorating roof. It's been a troublesome issue for many years. It's taken a great deal of maintenance attention. There may be underlying structural issues that need to be examined, not life-threatening issues, but issues that are causing movement that mean that there's going to be ongoing repairs. The cost to replace that roof by today's dollars would be probably in excess of $4 million, as much as $4.4 million just for construction. That's not taking into account the design fees, other costs that would be associated with it. So you can see it would be a substantial investment. And the real question is, before you make that kind of investment, really look at what you'd be getting out of it. The school is deficient in many other respects. It doesn't support the middle school program. There are many instructional spaces that don't receive natural light. There are important programmatic spaces that are simply missing. For instance, collaborative learning spaces. The school is set up on a team teaching approach, and to really make that effective, you have to have collaborative learning spaces where kids get together and do project-based learning, joint classes, they hear outside speakers, and that's absent. Special education doesn't have dedicated spaces. It's being taught in wherever they can find space, frankly. Science classrooms are not adequate by today's standards. There is no space dedicated for technology education. There are no music practice rooms. These are standard components now of middle schools throughout the state of Maryland. There are also a lack of small spaces where you could hold one-on-one or small group instruction, and that's particularly important as we see increasing numbers of children with special needs. These are special education students, these are English language learners, these are children who come from backgrounds of poverty who need attention. They need smaller groups in order to be able to advance along with their peers, and the absence of those spaces is a real detriment to those children. There are program spaces that are badly located. The art classroom, for instance, doesn't get any natural light. The computer lab is distant from the instructional spaces. The circulation pattern is extremely difficult to manage. I've watched it in action at lunchtime, and it's a real dance to move all the students around without having the different age groups interact. There are a lack of Americans with disabilities accommodations. There is not a single restroom in the school that meets current ADA requirements for accommodation for people with disabilities. There is no elevator to the second floor. If there is a child in the 6th grade who has a disability and can't mount the stairs, they would have to move the program downstairs, and I do understand that that actually did happen sometime within fairly recent memory. There are building performance deficiencies. The building is very inefficient. It's very difficult to maintain, very poor temperature control, spaces that are too hot, spaces that are too cold. The plumbing is deficient. The lighting is inadequate. Electrical distribution is a problem. So all of these issues would have to be addressed, and obviously they're quite expensive. But part of the goal in this whole exercise is not only to improve the Kent County Middle School as an instructional space for the students, but also to leverage this very, very large project to improve the school system as a whole. And one of the ways that will be measured is through better utilization of the spaces. The state has a factor called state-rated capacity, which is a standard measure that's used across the state to determine how many students can be within a school. It's one way to compare one school to another, one jurisdiction to another. And by that measure, Kent County Public Schools is operating at 61% of utilization, which is a very low number. It indicates considerable inefficiency. Kent County High School is operating at about 50% utilization, even lower than the average for all the schools in Kent County. On top of this, we have the Maryland Blueprint legislation, which will require pre-K programs for 3-year-olds, and we need space in the elementary schools for those new programs, and that will be coming very, very soon. Just to look at school utilization, based on the state-ready capacity, which was updated in April of 2019, it's about 2,900 seats. The actual enrollment in the fall of 2022 was about 1,758. That's about 61% utilization. Looking forward, looking out to 2026, the overall utilization will be 61%. It hardly changes at all overall. And out to 2031, it's about 62.4%. So it improves slightly, but it's still quite inadequate. Low school utilization means there's an inefficient use of school resources. You have excess space which has to be maintained, cooled, heated. All of that represents money which is not going into the classroom, not going into teachers' salaries, into resources for students. It also has implications in terms of state funding, because the state does look at available capacity in schools when it's determining how much to fund a project. And if it sees that there's space which is underutilized that could be used for the program, then it'll reduce the amount of state funding that will be provided for the project. And that, of course, is a very, very serious issue. You want to maximize state funding as much as possible. There are a number of factors that had to be considered. The most important is clearly education. What's the impact on students and the support that students receive during their career, during the middle school years? So it's very, very important years when students form their ideas about society, friends, family, education itself. But also, what's the impact on the community? How will the community use this very important public facility? And how will it be accepted by the community? What does the community want from this facility? We had to look at site advantages and disadvantages. We had to look at total cost. There are basically two strands to this. One is the capital cost. That's what we call first cost, the cost to design and build and occupy the building, which of course is a major factor. But life cycle costs, looking at the 40-year life that a building like this will probably have, and in fact it's likely to be longer. Rule of thumb, and it varies of course from building to building, but the rule of thumb is that you'll spend 4 to 5 times as much during the life cycle of a building as you spent on the actual construction. So every decision that's made about materials, about square footage in the construction phase, in the design and construction phase, will have implications for decades to come in terms of the finances of the school system. And then, of course, the issue that I raised a minute ago about state funding participation and what this would mean for the local government obligation. So variables that were looked at, the grade configuration. What's the appropriate grade configuration for this school? What should the total size be in terms of its square footage? And that's driven largely by the educational program that you need to have, but also that you want to have. Should it be a renovation or should it be a replacement? What about community space within the school? The state does support up to 3,000 square feet of community space that can be used for a variety of functions. What should the location be? Should it be at the existing site in Chestertown, or should it be at a site in Worton on the same campus as the high school, which also has nearby the community recreation system, the park, and it also has the facility, the new facility. So this diagram, I think, gives some idea of the choices that were presented to the Planning Commission. Grade configuration, should it be 3 grades? Is that 6 to 8? Is that 5 to 7? Should it be 4 grades, 5 to 8? Should it be 2 grades, 6 and 7? There are advantages and disadvantages to each one of these. Should it be a renovation or a replacement? If it's a renovation, obviously that's at Chestertown, but if it's a replacement, that could be either at Chestertown or it could be at the Worton site. If it is at the Worton site, should it be a standalone facility or should it be attached to the high school? And under either one of those options, the 8th grade could either be part of the middle school or it could be a separate academy within the high school. There is space, and we have shown that that could work just from a purely technical point of view. So there are many, many choices that have to be made. Excuse me. The committee looked at this, and through a fairly lengthy process of decision-making and scoring and prioritization, looking at a total of 12 different planning options, they came out with a number of conclusions. First of all, in terms of grade band configurations, they ruled out an 8th grade academy. It's not viewed favorably. It isolates the 8th graders from both the middle school and from the high school, and this is not seen as good educationally or in terms of their development as people. Also, another option where any configuration that ends in 7th grade is not seen as a good option. 7th grade is not seen as the right year in which kids have to make that very difficult transition from the nurturing environment of the middle school to the much bigger environment, the almost adult environment of the high school. 8th grade is seen as the appropriate time for them to make that transition. In considering renovation versus replacement, the committee came to the decision that replacement is favored. I think that makes a great deal of sense. Everybody would like to have a new school over one that is simply renovated. In terms of location, it came out just about even between the Worton site and the Chestertown site, the Worton site being slightly favored by the committee. The most favored option of all, initially, was replacement of the school at the Worton site with grades 5 to 8 and as a standalone facility. But when there was further discussion and the committee understood that if the school were attached to the high school, then there could be funding that would be available that could sponsor a number of renovations in the high school itself, helping to bring some of the facilities within that large building up to date. Then the committee made a decision that the attachment option really was something that should be looked at. And out of this came the three options that the committee, they met on September 7th, and determined that the three options that should be presented to the Board of Education on September 12th were option 1, replacement of the school at the Chestertown site for grades 5 to 8. Option 2, replacement at the Worton site as a standalone facility, again for grades 5 to 8. And option 3, replacement as an attachment to Kent County High School, grades 5 to 8, but with improvements to the high school. All three options were presented equally. The board listened and took those options, and they gave the approval to proceed to present these options to the community for input from the community. The board itself did not weigh in on any one of these options as being better than any of the others. They wanted to hear from the community before making any decision whatsoever. To go through these options, but talk about each of them has their benefits, each of them has their challenges. The replacement of the Chestertown site for grades 5 to 8 would be a complete new school. It would be about 85,600 square feet. It would be larger than the existing school of 78,795. It would now house 4 grades instead of 3 grades. That accounts for part of the increase in square footage. And in addition, it would have some of those middle school facilities that I mentioned were not there or are not there in the current Kent County Middle School, for instance, the technology space. This would involve demolition of the existing Kent County Middle School. The total cost, about $51.1 million. That would include architectural engineering costs, planning costs. It also does include community use space, 3,000 square feet of community use space. The advantages, the familiar location, this is where the school is right now. It's walking distance for a number of students. Actually, it's not as many as I thought. It's about 34 students we learned recently. It does sustain existing relationships between the school and the town, Washington College, and other organizations. Central location in the county. It would be a new design, so it would meet all of the educational needs. And it would free up space in the elementary schools by moving 5th grade into the middle school environment. This would create space for the 3-year-old program. It would also accommodate any future growth in the elementary school population. The negatives are pretty significant. The site is extremely small, 15 acres. By today's standards, a middle school ought to have 30 acres minimum. For even the smallest of middle schools, the size increases from there depending on the number of students. What's driving this acreage of 30 acres are the parking requirements, the footprint of the building itself. Even if you go to 2 stories, it's still a large footprint. Stormwater management requirements are very extensive now, and then, of course, the playing fields. So at 15 acres, there's going to be a reduction in one way or another, and typically that's in the playing fields. In my experience, what you get are overlapped playing fields where the baseball diamond, softball diamond, has to overlap onto the soccer field. So that creates a scheduling issue in terms of how you run your PE sessions. Also, another advantage is that during construction, there would be disruption to the educational program, and that's driven by the small size of the site. There would be noise, dust, traffic. There are safety issues. The playing fields would be lost during construction. They simply couldn't be used, and you'd have to have your physical education classes elsewhere. That means travel, loss of time while students are coming and going. Good construction management can certainly address all the noise, dust, traffic issues, and safety issues. I've seen it done repeatedly. Preston Elementary School in Caroline County did an outstanding job of managing this kind of construction, but it's not easy for anybody. Also, there is a possibility that temporary housing might have to be found for the students during some period of the construction. If it's found through the architectural engineering design that the new school has to overlap on the existing school. And that has happened. Easton Elementary School is the most recent example in my experience where you had that kind of overlap, and then you had to be involved in phasing and moving the kids around, and you probably will have to have some temporary housing for them, either relocatables on the site or moving them off-site altogether. The costs will be higher than if there was a replacement at Worton. It's driven partly by the demolition costs, the traffic controls and phasing that are necessary to preserve the traffic movement, safety noise controls, the phasing costs. Also, and I can't say this for sure, this is where a civil engineer would have to come into this process once the design begins to be developed. But because of the small size of the site and the stormwater management requirements, you may well need an underground stormwater facility. That would be on the order of magnitude of about $700,000 to $1 million, additional on top of the figure that I've shown you there. As I said, that is a guess right now, because we don't know until we actually have someone involved who's doing the calculations. And also, the 5th graders would be traveling out of their community. That's true for all of the options that we're talking about here. A concept that shows what this might look like: the school located at about the middle of the site, where the existing school is, that would be demolished. Those would become the playing fields. Parking could be located in front of the school on the south side on Campus Avenue. Stormwater management facilities located at various places around the site. Now, once you engage an architectural engineering firm, they could come up with a completely different concept. This is just something that my team put together so we could begin to get an idea what this might look like. You can see it's a small site, so it is going to be a difficult situation. Replacement of the Worton site for grades 5 to 8. Again, a completely new school, the same square footage as before. This raises a question of what to do with the existing Kent County Middle School facility, and a number of options. It could be surplus to the county. The county might find uses for it, or they might want to demolish it and turn the site into a park, a recreation center. It could be used by the Board of Education for board offices. It's even been speculated perhaps Garnett Elementary School could move in there, which as it grows, it will need more space. But it would require renovation, so that would be, again, a major capital project, so it would follow on the heels of the middle school. Another possibility is you could have joint use of the facility. Nonprofits, other governmental functions could move in there. It could be local government, state government, perhaps even the federal government might have some reason to be in the facility. Or it could, and this is an intriguing idea, but it would require a lot of study, it could be developed as a public-private partnership where the board retains ownership of the site, but a private entity comes in, builds a facility, and the revenue stream that comes from that facility then helps the Board of Education to undertake capital projects elsewhere in the jurisdiction. The cost here is somewhat lower than at the Chestertown site. By our calculation, $47.7 million as opposed to $51.1 million. The difference in cost is largely because you're not involved in those complex site issues that I talked about with the Chestertown site. The site at Worton is very, very large. I think it's about 70 acres total. It's occupied by the high school. It's occupied by the former Worton Elementary School. There are several possible locations where a very adequate new middle school could be located. The construction of that middle school would be separated from the high school, so you would not have the same disruption issues, dust, noise, and so forth that you would have at the Chestertown site. The students would also remain at Kent County Middle School during construction. They would all move over at one time once the building is complete, so there would be no disruption to the educational program at the existing site while construction was underway. The new design, as before, would completely meet all the educational needs. Something that you get by being at the Worton site are potential educational opportunities with the high school. For instance, music, band, or orchestra, extracurricular activities, art, and CTE exposure. And Ms. Hemstetter was at the meeting last night, and she spoke very eloquently about how the advantages that this gives to middle school students to have these kinds of exposures to the kinds of programs that they'll be having in high school, and also mentoring opportunities for the older students to actually have an influence, a beneficial influence on the younger students. There would also be the community recreation facility nearby that could be used. The cost being lower means that there's money freed up for other projects. And then again, grades 5 to 8 frees up space at the elementary schools. However, this is not a walking school for most students. Many middle school students would ride buses with high school students, and we know that that would always be a concern for parents. The location is not as central. I think there's some question about whether or not. I think we'd have to take measurements, and it also is, how do you measure this? But do you measure it by bus ride? Do you measure it as the crow flies? So it actually is not a settled issue, I think, that whether it's less central or more central. And again, fifth graders travel out of the community. Conceptually, we can show a couple of possible locations. In this diagram, blue represents the existing high school. Green represents the former Worton Elementary School, and the two gold outlines represent possible locations for the middle school. There are other locations as well, and that's where you would need to get involved in a feasibility study to determine which is the best location, and that would be looking at educational advantage, site implications, traffic implications. No matter where you put it, there will be some reconfiguration of the driveways, the roadways, the parking, and so forth. That's inevitable. But there is ample space there for this kind of configuration. And the third option is as an attachment to the high school, again for grades 5 to 8. This would involve joint use of some of the facilities. Middle school students and high school students would use some of the same facilities. Now, these tend to be the large, long-span high bay facilities like the gymnasium, the cafeteria, music rooms, art rooms. All of those are actually well positioned in a diagram which I'll show you. The effect of that is to reduce the amount of new construction that you need very significantly. From 86,500 square feet, we estimate that now you could have the middle school housed in 61,100 of new construction and about 6,000 square feet of renovation of existing high school space. What this does through a financial perspective is it actually frees up enough funding, both state and local, that you could renovate, by our calculation, about 43,000 square feet of the existing high school. And considering that the total footprint of the high school now is about 189,000 square feet, this is a not insignificant percentage of the total that could be potentially renovated. Some of that would be driven by the displacement of high school functions from the areas where middle school students would occupy, but others could be simply improvements that are needed in the school. For instance, to bring together some of the departments which right now are dispersed in different locations around the school. Again, you would have the same choices with the Kent County Middle School facilities, whether to surplus, whether to use for other board functions, whether to investigate public-private partnership. Total cost here, by our calculation, is about $51.8 million. Somewhat more than the replacement school at the Chestertown site. About $33.1 million of that would go into the middle school, including the renovation. About $18.7 would go into the high school. The state participation, under our calculation, for this option would actually be the largest of all three of the options. Advantages here, the educational opportunities become very significant because now you have essentially two schools under one roof. And I do want to emphasize two schools. They would be separated, different administrations, different schedules, but with the possibility of joint use on appropriate scheduling of some of the facilities. The reduction of the middle school cost obviously leverages funds to upgrade the high school. You get a high level of state funding participation, second lowest cost per student of all the options. The new design will largely meet the educational requirements. There always are some compromises whenever you do an attachment and renovation option versus building new, greenfield type of situation. Again, the community recreation facility is nearby. Students would stay at Kent County Middle School until the project is complete. Frees up space at the elementary schools for the 3-year-old program. It does improve the efficiency of the high school by taking away some of the high school space and giving it to the middle school. It actually improves the efficiency relative to state-rated capacity. That improves the funding posture relative to the Interagency Commission. And then also, because you're reducing the total footprint of what you would have in the high school plus what you would build if the middle school were built new, by combining the two, the total footprint is reduced. You would reduce the long-term operating and maintenance costs. And we haven't done that calculation, but it stands to reason if you're building less square footage under this option, then in the long term, you're going to be reducing operation and maintenance costs. The negatives, it is quite complex to schedule the joint use facilities. We've had a number of meetings between the principal of the middle school and the principal of the high school, and they've talked about it. It's completely feasible to do, but no one is pretending that it's an easy thing to do. Maintaining separation of the age groups, we know that's a very keen issue for parents. The kids will be cut together at various times on buses, in the corridors, in the joint use facilities. There's always the possibility they'll be crossing paths, interacting, and good management, good scheduling, good leadership, I think, can address those issues. Would not be a walking school for most students, as we've said with the other Worton option. Many middle school students would ride the bus with high school students. There would be more disruption to the high school program during construction, inevitably. If you're building right next on the other side of a wall, noise, dust, commotion, safety issues are going to be there no matter how you manage it, and it can be managed quite well, but it still is going to be more difficult than building a standalone. The sequencing of the renovations and construction has to be done very carefully to make sure that all the spaces are ready when they need to be ready for both the high school students and the middle school students. Location not being central in the county, and fifth graders traveling out of the county. And what I'm showing here is very much a concept. It's a tentative plan concept that I and my colleague in this, Gloria Mikołajczyk, who was with the state government for a number of decades and recently retired, an architect like myself. And we developed this because we had to really test to see, is it feasible is it even possible to attach the middle school to the high school in such a way that you can get these joint use situations between middle school students and high school students using the same facility while preserving the separations which are absolutely essential. So we developed this in more detail than the other options that you've seen, but it is a diagram. From our perspective, no one could take this and build from it. I want to assure you that no contractor would go near this. This will require a great deal of development of the architectural engineering, and once you engage an architect, an engineering team, they could come out with a completely different design. They could throw this out the window and come up with something completely different than what we're showing here. And it's also not to scale. It's just meant as a diagram to basically show how this would work. And what you can see here is 5th grade on the left, which is the north side, 6th grade on the west side. 5th and 6th, the youngest grades, are closest to the entrance, closest to the bus drop-off. 7th and 8th grade are a bit further away. 8th grade is closest to the high school students. They're closest in age. The entrances and exits to the high school are very carefully controlled so that the middle school students can access the gymnasium, the cafeteria. Those are both nearby. They can access the auditorium and the music rooms and the art rooms, but nobody from the outside, particularly no high school student, can enter the middle school without permission. They simply can't do it. At the same time, of course, and this is very important, you have to maintain fire egress at all times for every occupant in the building. So it becomes an architectural challenge, but it has been done and it can be met. The blue spaces represent the collaborative team spaces for each of the grades. That's missing in the current middle school situation. So here you have the opportunity to include them. Tech classroom is included. Music is being provided for joint use. We also have the library media center, the center, auxiliary gym, PE support, other facilities that you don't get right now at the middle school facility. Very important that the public be able to recognize what is the middle school, what is the high school, where do I go when I'm coming to pick up my middle school student to take them to the dentist, or my high school student to take them to the dentist. New middle school entrance that's clearly flagged and shows from the main entrance, and then an enhanced high school entrance that would also be very clearly marked. Right now, there is very little marker of where the entry is on the high school for anybody who's visiting. That would be something to correct so that the identities of these two schools are very distinct and separate. And showing what this would look like in the site, the blue outline there gives a rough idea of the footprint. You can see that there's considerable distance from between the road, Lambs Meadows Road, and the school frontage. The road, the fire lane would have to be reconfigured, the parking would have to be reconfigured. That's all part of the design. But it does give some idea that this would be feasible. What I'm showing here and in the previous diagram is a one-story option. If you did go to 2 stories, it would reduce the footprint by some amount. It would be a smaller footprint, and that could be done. Some of the areas that could be renovated within the school, we've created a list. This is us as architects who have created this list. This is not even recommended at this point to the superintendent or to the board. We were just trying to work out what this might imply. In order to actually carry through this exercise, you would again have to have a committee that would be established. They would work through all the options. They would have to look at the educational necessity, the educational benefit. They'd look at the cost. They'd look at the disruption impact, the sequencing, and so forth. So it would be a very complex process and a very good process to go through. But in the end, I think that you could say that with the funds that would be available, you could actually gain quite a bit of advantage to the high school in terms of renovated spaces. The blue in this diagram represents the areas of the middle school that would be renovated, or the areas of the high school that would be renovated for middle school program. And just to summarize, you can see the 3 options here with the costs that are shown. Replacement at the Chestertown site, by our calculation, $51.1 million. At the Worton site, $47.7 million. As an attachment to the high school with improvements to the high school, $51.8 million. Critical issue is the amount that the Board of County Commissioners would be obligated to. 28.9 million is the figure that we were working to. We've exceeded that, and it would be exceeded at the Chestertown site. It would come in slightly under the Worton site, and we did actually tailor the budget for the renovations at the high school to meet the 28.9 million. Now, I do want to say the way that the costs were calculated is what we call a parametric method, basically using a dollar per square foot figure. It's different dollar per square foot depending on the level of renovation work that might be needed. New construction has a single figure that applies to all new construction. It's a very standard formula. It's one that's used by the IAC. It's used across the state. And so this is not the same thing as getting an estimate from an architectural engineering team once they've actually developed a design. So this is for budgeting purposes, this is a standard way to approach this issue of costs. What we'd like to know from you, from the community, are your thoughts about grade band configurations, renovation versus replacement, the Worton site versus the Chestertown site, whether it should be a standalone facility at Worton versus an attachment to the Kent County High School. And I just want to remind people that at this time, no decisions have been made by the Board of Education. This is coming to you as the three options, and in fact, the committee and the superintendent and myself are interested if any other option can be presented that we haven't thought about. That would be very important. Your input, your reactions to the three options is extremely important as we move forward, as recommendations are presented to the Board of Education. And just to remind you, there is a place, an email address. You can send in comments or questions or observations to the email address that's shown here. It's also available on the board site, very easy to find, and we're very interested in hearing from you. So I'll go back to this slide so we can keep those questions for you, and if there's any discussion, we'd like to hear it. Thank you very much, and I have to say that I've been absolutely pleased to have been part of this process. It's been a wonderful process to go through, even though very lengthy, and it will continue to be very lengthy. We've got a long road ahead of us, but still it's a great process to be involved in.
I would note, just for information, I know this was one of the questions that was asked when I opened up the email, is the age of the Kent County Middle School. Kent County Middle School was built in 1949, so it's about 73 years old. And another question that was asked is, how long has it been since the Board of Ed has built a new school? And it's been about 50 years since we built a new school. We're the only school system in the state of Maryland that has not built a school in 50 years. So that's kind of where we're at. Those were the two questions that were asked. Another question was asked in terms of, had we considered using Worton Elementary? And I don't know if that's something that you would like to respond to, Dr. Lever.
Well, that was brought up, Dr. Couch, in the strategic planning effort in 2018. It was one of the recommendations was the Board of Education could move from the current location where we are tonight to the Worton facility with some renovations, and it could be used for other central office functions, and then this current facility would be surplused to the county. But the decision was taken not to undertake that move. But that facility is available, and in looking at the high school options, could we go back to that slide, please? You'll notice that in the upper right-hand corner of the building plan, it shows health professions. That area is right now occupied by the operations and maintenance group of the school system. And under this idea, the operations and maintenance could move to the Worton facility with some minor renovations. The space they're in now in the high school would be renovated, and that could become a proper location for the health professions, which is one of the career and technical education offerings. So that would move that among the other career CTE offerings. So that is a possibility.
If anybody else has questions, we'd ask you to come to the podium and ask those questions, since we are recording the session. You have to come up. Please state your name and then your question.
My name is Frank Rhodes. I have a few questions. First of all, I know you haven't made a vote on this, and I get that. But I firmly feel, going through this whole thing, you know where you want to go. That's in my opinion. We had a forum last night, and one of the board members basically suggested that that's what they wanted to do when they said they haven't made a decision yet. So I understand, in fact, this plan here looks like the one you're favoring. I understand that. I feel that, well, I have a few questions. First of all,
Well, let me just respond to
Okay.
your first comment with regard to the reason why this is more detailed is because we had to prove it to ourselves that it could be done. I don't know, Dr. Lever, if you would like to talk a little bit about why this is a little more detailed in this particular slide.
Could you go back to the, I think it's 2 slides before? Yes. Basically, you know, it's not enough to be able to say you can attach a middle school to a high school and you can have joint use. In 2018, I ran through the exercise of looking at several options for attachment. Each of them had pros and cons, under the same idea that there might be some advantages to that, and every one of them had great difficulties. So in order to be able to come forward and, as architects, to say, you know, we think this can be done, we know very well that there are good architects in this state who can build a new middle school, can design a new standalone middle school, either at the Chestertown site or at the Worton site. You know, it's not an easy thing, but they can do it. To attach a middle school to a high school and have joint use is an extremely challenging task. We had to convince ourselves before we came forward and even developed this as an option, even presented it as an option, to say, do we think it can work? And by going through this level of what we call one-line drawing, that just basically showing where the spaces are, that's how we indicate it to ourselves, and then talk to the committee about to say, this actually, we think it actually can be done. Now, the actual architectural engineering, as I said before, would be worked out by a team if this is the option that would be selected. But I do have to take issue with the statement, you know where you want to go. I'm not sure what the evidence is for that statement, sir.
I don't really have super evidence, but I can say one thing. I know some people in here that are very close to Dr. Couch, and when Dr. Couch makes a decision on this board, it's sort of like a yes board. That's my own opinion. I'm not going to expand any more on that. But I do have another question. Would the school system, and by the way, I would like to ask, after the election, I'd like to ask if the vote on this could be held next year, because we're going to have, even if you have 1 new board member or 2 new board members, you're also going to have new county commissioners, and I think it would be, that would be the proper thing to do,
Okay,
in my opinion.
Let me respond to that.
Okay.
In that, that is certainly a decision that the board would need to make in terms of when they make the decision on the final option that would be presented to the county commissioners. And we've already talked about it as a board, that we would wait till the new county commissioners are seated, because the funding is going to come from them.
So that means it would be the new Board of Education would be voting on it too.
That is taken under advisement as well.
Okay, I just think,
I'm not going to speak for the board right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're gathering information. These are the listening sessions.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to present this information to the board at the end of November in terms of what we found out with the listening sessions. And at that point in time, the board could certainly decide to delay. It's part of the slide that we would make the decision either in December or January. There's no final decision about that.
so
at
let's
this
say
point.
there's chances of this happening are slim, but let's say another option pops up. Are you prepared to go longer and try to discuss the option, or you can still make the decision in November?
We are open to any kind of new decision that might be brought forward.
Okay, I just wanted to ask that question. So another question is, would the school system, well, first of all, if that happens and a new board comes in, no matter what the vote is, I'll whatever, I want to clarify, because last night someone was a little confused. if a vote comes in, and let's say I vote against it, but everyone votes for it, or it's split, I'm going to support whatever the vote is. I'm not going to be, whatever it is, I'm going to be full into whatever the decision is. I want you to know that. The next question is, would the school system be willing to pay to raise the middle school in Chestertown so the town doesn't have to pay for it? That's the first question. And will a local firm...
Wait a minute. What is that question again?
If you decide to build out here, and if the decision comes up that building in town is going to be, what did you call it, excess property, would the school system be willing to pay, since it's your property, if you give it to the town, would they be willing to pay to demolish the building so the town doesn't incur that cost and so the county commissioners don't incur it? And I don't know how much it would cost to take a building like that down.
First of all, it would be a county building, not a town building.
Okay, whatever.
But technically, Board of Education property has to be surplus to the county government, not to the local municipality. But if it were surplus, then that would be a decision by the Board of County Commissioners, not by the Board of Education. Now, if the Board of Education decided to retain the facility for various reasons, raising the building might be one option, but they would have to find the funding for it.
But would the school system be willing to pay for it? That's what I'm saying. Why, it's like the one in Millington, it sat there and you ended up giving it away for $1, but is the one in Chestertown worth $1? It's probably not. So I would think that the school system, Board of Education or whoever, should pay to take that building down. So it's not incurred by the county or the town.
Well, ultimately, it will be incurred by the Board of Education because all their funding comes from the state and from the
Okay, so
county.
the Board of Education would pay to take it down?
No, I didn't say that, sir.
Okay.
I didn't say that. The Board of Education could undertake it if that was the decision, but they would have to have funding from the county. So it would still cost the county, because that would have to be part of the budget.
I understand.
The ultimate budget that was established.
Okay, and another thing, will you have or push to have a local firm, if there's one available, build this new project?
Okay, what would have to happen when we get to that point is we would put it out to bid, and then we would select an architect that.
The reason I ask is, I've been out at the high school, and I know the roof is still leaking where they repaired, and it's going to leak for a while until they get it all sealed. But someone told me yesterday, and I don't know if this is true, that I don't know how many bids you had for that roof, but it was told to me that you picked the cheapest bid. Now, I understand you want to save money, but sometimes the lowest bid is not the best bid.
We did not pick.
Okay, I want to clear that up.
We did not pick the lowest bid.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay. Could I go to your question about local contractors?
Yes.
This would be a big project, and a contractor would have to, if there was a general contracting approach, they'd have to have bonding equivalent to this. And I don't know if there are firms in the county that are local that have bonding limits that can meet the size of this project, along with whatever obligations they have. Okay. You can use a method called construction management agency, where you break the project down into packages, smaller packages that can be tailored to local bonding capacity. For instance, you can break out, say, the roof as a separate package. You can do this for new, you can do this for renovation. Get it down to a bonding capacity which does make it accessible to local contractors, and that can be a strategy, and it has been used to increase not only local participation, but minority business participation, women-owned business participation, and that it has been very, very effective, actually. Now, there are pros and cons to every delivery method. The method which is gaining ground in Maryland, and it actually started here on the Eastern Shore in Wicomico County, is construction management at risk. And it has some of the advantages of general contracting. You're getting a solid price, you can live with it, you know that price is going to be in advance, it's contractual for the total project, but you can also break down the packages at the same time. Break down the project into packages so that you can begin to get that good local participation, MBE, WBE participation.
So local contractors that aren't that large could, possibly make a bid to do a certain part of the school or something like that. I just think we need the work around here. I've seen so many projects in the past where firms from Baltimore come here and wherever, and we're sitting here, we don't get the work. We need the work in this county, and I just think it would be great if you could do that.
That's right. Could I just add one thing?
Sure.
It's also possible to get kids, the students, those who are involved in the CTE program in construction or in design, get them involved. Taking kind of their level of development, safety issues, all of that, the fact that they have to do their studies and so on. But we've seen that work extremely well.
That's a
With
great
the
idea.
right contractor, the right construction manager, they get very enthusiastic about this. They really want, because they're facing a labor shortages of skilled labor. When they see young people who are interested and they want to mentor those young people, they're actually building their own future by doing that.
I get
So,
it. Thank you, you've answered everything I needed.
okay.
Any other questions?
Good evening. My name is Lisa Stewart. I don't really have a question, but just a comment. I am most favorable in the option number 2 to build a brand-new middle school. Just going through the county, going through Maryland, it's kind of heartbreaking that you go to other counties and you see new schools, whether it's an elementary school or a middle school, and they're in the state of Maryland. And here, born and raised in Kent County, and having been through Worton Elementary School, Chestertown Middle School, and Kent County High School, it will be really refreshing to see something that is new, that's going to bring, hopefully, increase our enrollment, because right now we struggle with declining enrollment. A lot of things just in the county itself, a lot of businesses are not around. We have to go out and travel to different places to get some of the simplest things that we need. So I believe that it's very important that we have a new school. Our kids deserve that new school, that refreshing opportunity. And at the Worton location, I believe that will definitely decrease operation costs, also allow that opportunity to have those middle school students work with high school students or have something to look forward to and make that transition from middle school to high school even easier, even though it may not be totally 100% central, but I believe just going up in, grade level, it essentially is central because you do have the Kent County Community Center that's there. You do have the Worton Elementary School site that is there that will house potentially other central office, essentials. So I definitely would go for that. And also, it is the least expensive out of all the 3 options. So that's just good and refreshing in my opinion. I just want that to be noted that we should just get a new middle school.
Could I just make a comment, Phil? In the option shown here, okay, and believe me, I do understand the impact that a new school can have in terms of sort of the image of the county. But this would now be the new face of this is what people would see as they're approaching the school when they're driving on the highway. And I have seen additions to schools. I'm thinking of a high school, South Carroll High School, where they made an addition of a performing arts center on an old 1970s, 1980s building that had really very bland, dull building. The new addition is beautiful, and it becomes the new image of what the school is. So that's part of the architectural challenge here. But
we hear you. We hear what you
we do
said.
hear you, yes.
Thank you, appreciate it.
I can wait if there's anything else. And no questions off the table. Any comments? Maybe not a question? No? Okay. Well, that concludes our presentation, our 3rd listening session. Our next listening session will be October the 27th, Kent County Middle School. We hope that people will come out. I know that there's quite a few people listening this evening, and so we thank you for your attention this evening, and we'll sign off. So thank